Welcome to Fork Around and Find Out, the podcast about building, running, and maintaining software and systems. Hello and welcome to Fork Around and Find Out, the podcast that puts the disaster in your recovery. I'm your host, Justin Garrison, and with me as always is Autumn Nash. Today on the show, we have Seth Eliot. Welcome to the show, Seth.
Oh, thanks, Justin. I hope to talk more about the recovery and less about the disaster.
We'll see. They go hand in
disaster
hand.
is usually the fun part, but like, where do you come up with these dad jokes, like on the fly? Like,
It was super easy on this one. Come on, disaster recovery.
It just...
So, Seth, like many of our guests on the show, you and I met in person. I was at All Things Open, right?
Yes.
And we had a great conversation over dinner, and I was just like,
fun.
More people need to hear this conversation. And that's why I was like, please come on and tell people all about what you're doing. And can you just give us a little bit of overview, where you're at, what you're working on?
Sure. I'm currently with a company called RPO, and you have to spell it out, ARPIO, because it sounds like the letters RPO, which is on purpose because RPO is Recovery Point Objective, which is super important to your disaster recovery plan. And RPO, that's what we do, disaster recovery. But before that, and actually, as recently as last year, I was with AWS. I was actually there 5 years. I was actually at Amazon a total of 15 years,
Wow.
But not all in a row. So as I was telling Autumn before we started, I went from Amazon to Microsoft to Amazon and now to RPO.
What's your secret? How do you survive 15 years at AWS? Because 4 years was like 6 lifetimes. Like,
I joined Amazon in 2005, and honestly, it was a different company back then.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think so. Whether Amazon operates as a startup, internally, I think it was a lot more startup-like back then than it is now. I mean, it's certainly a fine place now, and I really treasure the time there in terms of the people I worked with. But as a company, as an entity, it's different. And when I started at Amazon, there were only about 5,000 office workers, and mostly in Seattle. So, it was a big company, but not so I'm not counting warehouse folks, right? So the funny stat is I would visit the Tokyo office every once in a while in my later career, and the Tokyo office was bigger than Amazon was when I joined it, than all of Amazon was when I joined it.
that's wild.
Yeah.
I definitely think it changed a lot even in the last 5 years.
I think so too, honestly. Yeah, I think it's trying to find its way. I mean, anything that grows huge has trouble maintaining its cohesivity and its culture. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was a principal engineer at Amazon, and principal engineers had their own community. So back when there were 200, 250 principal engineers, we'd get together once a year from all over the world outside of Seattle here at Suncadia. We had our own email channels and later Slack. We had our own weekly meetings, our own cadence, and it felt like a community. And I felt like if I didn't at least know them well, I knew every other principal engineer. And now I don't know how many principal engineers there are. It's got to be over 1,000. And that community has kind of crumbled, right? I mean, yes, there's a Slack channel, but you don't feel like you know everyone. You don't feel like you're part of anything special. And it's almost like, senior principal is the new principal, because there's probably, I'm guessing, I'm not giving away anything. There's probably 250 senior principals at this point. So now that at that level, they can maintain community, but at the principal level, you can't.
Which is wild because it's no small feat to be a principal at Amazon.
Yeah, it carries a lot of cachet, and I think it used to be more special because principal engineers could do things like literally, like if I was having trouble. So I spent part of my career as a TPM, part as a developer, part as a tester, part as a solutions architect, developer advocate, all of these things, right? But like especially in the TPM days, if I wanted to get something done across teams and it wasn't working and we weren't able to communicate with the other team, and I would go to the other principal engineer on that team and have a one-on-one chat and things would get done. And maybe that still happens, honestly, but yeah.
It's an interesting perspective.
One of the things that I noticed when I joined, I joined in 2020, which was just during COVID time, like right before COVID happened and when everyone
That's
became
when
remote.
I joined too.
And I was looking at the internal site. They had Old Fart that would just show like the size of the company and things like that. And I noticed that I came from Disney to Amazon. I was like, Disney's a big company. And Disney was just going through the acquisition of buying Fox at the time, or at least parts of Fox. Mm-hmm. And it was going to go from about 120,000 people to over 200,000 people. I was like, that's a huge, you're almost doubling in size of this company. And I started at Amazon and it was somewhere around like 700,000 people.
Yeah.
And within a year, it had grown to over 1.5 million. And I was like,
Right.
you double, like that is.
But
And that's
you know what the
counting
odd
warehouse
part is,
workers.
though?
Exactly.
Right?
In vast majority of that is not AWS. It's not, but
Yeah.
like Amazon as a company is so big that I
But
was
what
like,
I don't
wow.
understand is when things started to break down and really change, it was never when they were adding mass amounts of people. Like for some weird way, like that was almost the height of when people were getting things done, you know?
That was when they were firing mass amounts of people.
Yes, like you know what I mean? But like
Yeah.
people keep saying it's like, oh, well, it's because it grew. The growth wasn't the bad part. The growth, we were doing some really amazing, cool things. We got to work with some smart people. Like it is amazing the things that we got done. It was never the growth was the negative part. Like I feel like you were really innovating and finding ways to do things. And then it got to the point where it was like, I think you can only move the goalpost so many times and people can only live in kind of like fear for so long, you know?
But I think the people, I have to emphasize, the people there are terrific. I really, like,
Oh, some of
am
the smartest people
thankful
I've ever met in my entire life. Like
for
they,
all the teams I was able to work with. And you're right. Any of the problematic kind of behavior came from sort of top down, which was very anti-Amazonian. The whole point of Amazon is these independent teams that have autonomy, and that still exists at a lot of levels. But yeah, where it breaks down and things were coming top down and unclear and changing, and management didn't respect that autonomy. I've been on one particular team where managers came in from the outside and didn't understand how the individual contributors are supposed to have a lot, especially at principal level and higher, are supposed to have quite a bit of autonomy and tried to really micromanage and force down on the
which is so
individuals.
weird because Amazon managers get a bad rap, but sometimes the worst interactions are with people who don't know how to manage the Amazon way.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of good stuff's come. A lot of great experience came out of Amazon. As I said, in 2005, it was a very different company. It was very scrappy. It just felt a lot scrappy. I did, to get a bookshelf in my office, I had to like jump through all these hoops because we're out of bookshelves. Like, can you imagine that today? Like, you can't have a bookshelf. We don't want to pay for more bookshelves. We already have enough bookshelves out there. See if you can go find one somewhere. Like, no.
I mean, that might be how it is today.
Yeah, it might be for different reasons, right?
Yeah.
But they used to have this thing, actually, all the way up until I rejoined in 2014. And even at that point, they had the come to the fulfillment center, the warehouse during Christmas and wrap presents to help our staff. So they were asking like programmers and program managers and managers to come to the warehouse to wrap presents. Like, I don't think they do that anymore.
The scrappy part was my favorite part, though. Like, if you could come up with a good enough 6-pager, or, you could start a whole service. And,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, that was
Absolutely.
I think not to be too, like, cliche, but the, like, make a desk out of a door part was the cool part, you know?
So, Seth, you did a bunch of stuff there, and then also over at Microsoft. What got you into the realm of looking at disaster recovery, or just how that side of the like cloud and ecosystem works for technology?
Sure. I mean, I was on the Amazon side of the house, what they call stores now, but like the non-AWS side, right? And I'd been there for many years. And I was working with several teams. I worked with International Technology, which is how we like launch things outside the US. I worked with Amazon Fresh, which I think most people are familiar with, the grocery delivery, as either a principal engineer or a principal technical program manager. And I've been working with all these teams, like dozens of teams, on their architectures and necessarily, learning and understanding AWS and how it operates from the point of view of someone designing on AWS and someone implementing on AWS. And I just got really more and more interested in the cloud and how the cloud operates. So I wanted to find a role. I wanted to cross that boundary, make that jump from the store side to the AWS side. And an opportunity came up with the well-architected team. The well-architected framework at the time had 5 pillars: operational excellence, security, reliability, cost, and performance. Hey, I got them all without. And there was an opening to work in the reliability pillar. And I'd certainly done that kind of work with my teams hands-on. So I would say I came onto that role with like a 5 out of 10 knowledge of resilience and reliability. But that's the great thing about AWS and Amazon. It gives you the opportunity to ramp up. And I think I had to ramp up quickly. And so I just dived in and became, learned more and more about what makes an architecture resilient. Having to rewrite the entire pillar in 2020 with the help from my community was very educational. And so I got into it that way. And then one of my colleagues, Alex Livingston, came to me and he said, he's on the cloud ops side, and he said he wanted to write a white paper on disaster recovery. And I'm like, I noticed when I was rewriting the pillar, we don't have a lot about disaster recovery and guidance for disaster recovery. So I thought that was a great opportunity. So I co-authored that with him. So that's still the canonical white paper on disaster recovery for AWS. It's written by me and Alex, or Alex and I don't know what the grammar is. And that as soon as I wrote that, and then Alex moved on to his next project, and I stayed, working, focused on resilience. And as a result of writing that white paper, SAs and TAMs and account managers would come to me say, my customer wants to know about disaster recovery. We want to know about disaster recovery. So I was like, wow, this is untapped need to provide disaster recovery guidance. So I just doubled down on it and wrote blog posts and created an internal community around it. And at the same time, there was another group that's spinning up a disaster recovery set of workshops for an immersion day. So I became their advisor, and just everything became around that. And it was self-fulfilling, because the more we'd build, the more interest we'd get, and the more interest we get, the more we'd want to build.
I want to go back just a little bit there when you were saying you were on the Amazon side of things. And a lot of people don't realize that, especially when you were probably there, that was nowhere close to what AWS is today, right? Like people were like, oh, Amazon.com runs on AWS. I was like, well, today, like I'm sure most of it, if not all of it does. But like back in the day, like it was like a separate environment, right? Like there was like data center, here's Amazon.com, and then here's this AWS that we're selling to other people.
Well, exactly. Well, I joined in 2005. You might notice that's before AWS was a thing, right? And as a developer, I do remember requesting servers. Like there was a portal I'd go to. How many servers do you want? What size of it? And at that point, we were using Zen virtualization for most stuff. So we were still using virtual stuff. So it was like you could have these Zen virtual servers today, or you could request physical hardware and have those in 2 weeks. Well, okay, I'll take the ones I can get today. So, and you'd request it. I did skip an important step in my career there. So I made it seem like I went right from these product teams to AWS. There actually was an intermediate role where I was on the Amazon stores side of the house on a team that was helping internal engineers with AWS adoption. So we were trying to move them. So back in 2010, when I wasn't there, there was a big lift and shift. Folks know what lift and shift is. Basically, you go to the cloud, but you don't really change your architecture. It was a giant lift and shift. Took over a year to do it, which put almost all Amazon services running on AWS, but didn't really change them much. Like from the point of view of developers, they still were going to a different portal than I went to, but a portal and asking for servers, and that's it. For them, that was the end of story. They happened to be EC2 servers running on AWS, but they weren't making use of AWS like other users do. And that was our job. That was our program, to actually move them out of this sort of lift and shift environment into their own AWS accounts and taking advantage of all that AWS has to offer. So that was a really awesome experience to learn about AWS and how it's used, because I would travel all over the world. I went to Luxembourg and London and Japan and sat down with developers. We held these whiteboarding sessions and asked them about their challenges, and stuff came up that I didn't expect. A lot of cost, right, at Amazon, and cost is a first class metric, right? So it's not just like, oh, we're just going to use the fanciest technology or the most fun technology. Like, how much is Lambda plus an API gateway cost versus spinning up an EC2 server? And then how does that compare? That's dollars and cents. And how does that compare in terms of operational burden, right? Which is harder to quantify. And that's a lot of the conversations I had.
And just the idea that Amazon.com lift and shifted to AWS is just fascinating, because when you really think about it.
Did you have to fight the Oracle license whole up?
That was a whole other project that happened, that was still going on when I came back, to get rid of all the Oracle databases across Amazon. And so our project to move everybody into their own AWS accounts was sort of a parallel project. So it's same kind of project where we have a top-down mandate from a CEO or some cases a VP, but usually CEO, because we have CEO of retail and CEO of AWS separate, right? We have a top-down mandate, and then we spin up this whole program team, and I was one of the technical people on that team. We go out and we help folks make this move. So that move off of Oracle was a similar kind of move.
See, that's what I think. Pete was also involved in all of that, and it's so interesting, like just learning about his career and your career. I think some of the technical knowledge that y'all probably got from the process of moving Amazon.com onto AWS and off of Oracle, like that is once in a lifetime experience to be able to see that many technical solutions and how different each team and organization was. But you're almost learning to use the same building blocks and
Yeah.
to improve those building blocks is just such a cool experience.
You talking about Pete Naylor?
Yes, I
Yeah,
love
yeah, I
Pete.
worked with him. Yeah, I mean, he's a great guy and a huge expert on all things
He
DynamoDB.
is the most humble and technically like sound but sweetest people in the whole world.
And
I'm
we have
such a
an
fan.
episode with Pete from Ship It,
Yeah.
which I can put that in the show notes.
Yeah, yeah, definitely should. People should listen to him. He has a lot of cool stuff to say. But it's interesting. So the part about moving, lifting, shifting to AWS, again, I was not there. That was the part when I was at Microsoft, right? So I left in 2009, came
So what
back in
did you do at
2014.
Microsoft?
Oh, I'll get back to that. But I
Okay.
want to share something funny, which is the lift and shift was called MAWS, M-A-W-S, the move to AWS, and that became the name MAWS, right? So when I came along with the program I was working in, that was called native AWS or NAWS, and people kept wanting to call it NAWS,
Nice.
and we kept trying to say, don't call it NAWS because that sounds just like MAWS, and we lost that fight. They still call it
They
NAWS
called
to
it
this
NAS
day.
on there.
Yeah, there's no way. If you call something native AWS, they're going to call it NAS. They're like, no, but that sounds
Okay,
just like
but
MAWS.
me and Justin were having this debate the other day. How come the internal secret names are better than the service names that we use publicly? Who does that? Like, why? Like, why are the internal names so cool?
Yeah, yeah. Some of the AWS names are boggling. But so you asked me what I was doing at Microsoft. So I left Amazon as a test manager. So I was doing I led a QA team that was responsible for, at the time, was all of Amazon's digital. So the MP3 downloads, the Prime Video, even though it wasn't called that at the time, and the Kindle ebook reader, all the back end software my team did the quality assurance on. So I went to Microsoft as what they call a test manager, their version of a QA manager, on what ultimately is an A/B testing platform. It was like an internal scrappy team trying to get A/B testing as a thing. Folks are familiar with the A/B testing, where you actually, some people get a different experience than others, and then you measure statistically what's the impact of that difference. So you don't have to guess what works. And that team eventually got folded into Bing, which had its own A/B testing program. But I ended up in a team called Engineering Excellence at Microsoft, and this is where I really discovered one of my passions, which is helping engineers. Right. So engineering excellence exists solely as an internal asset to help internal Microsoft engineers engineer better. And you might see some parallels that I ended up doing that in the native AWS program, right? I was working with internal engineers, and then when I moved to AWS, working with external engineers. But and so engineering excellence was a great experience for me there. And I think, you asked me before we started recording, like, why did I move back to Amazon? Well, Microsoft decided engineering excellence is not making any money, so let's just get rid of it. That'll save a lot of money, which obviously makes sense, right? If you get rid of, the knowledge sharing and the expertise for and making things easier for your engineers, that'll help things, right? Obviously.
So were you a test principal or were you a SDE principal at Amazon?
I was a test principal, SDE principal, SDET, SDET, at
Dude,
Microsoft.
some of the SDEFs at like Amazon are the smartest people I know.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Can we just talk about that? People would be like, "Oh, well, test engineers," and I was like, "Have you ever met a test engineer in real life?" Because like my favorite senior engineer, who I hope makes principal soon, I've never met somebody so brilliant in my entire, like, he can break and fix anything.
All right, well, give the shout out. I probably might know them even.
Dan Lucker.
Oh yeah, Dan. I know Dan. Yeah.
Love him. Like, he is like my, like, when you have like that like almost older brother that you follow around and you just bug incessantly. Like, he tried to give me like this whole like mean senior engineer, and I was like, we're gonna be besties whether you like it or not. Like, you are gonna teach me everything you know. Like, I have learned so much, like, between him and like Ben. Like, I am like a better engineer for knowing them. Like, they're like one of the best parts of working at Amazon. Like, even if the experience wasn't like the most healthy, they're the reason why I kept going, because they were just phenomenal.
I think SDETs want to teach more than other types of engineers for some reason. I don't
They're
know why
so
exactly.
good
Yeah.
at so many things. Like, that experience of breaking and fixing and automating is just like, does not get it. Like, nobody talks about that side of DevOps, right? Like, people talk
Yeah.
about DevOps engineers, but people don't realize that there's a whole realm of test engineers. Like, you've got QA, but you've also got SDevs. You've got like, there's so many like, and they're good at so many things.
One of the problems I've seen with testing orgs and people in testing is usually they don't have any power.
They
right?
don't, and it's
that org is just like,
ridiculous.
here, go find the bugs and then report them back, and then we don't want to fix them anyway. It's going to go on a backlog and no one cares. And like the orgs that really are like, hey, you have the power to stop a release or to tell the dev team like we can't ship this. Like same thing we talked to about like SRE, right? Like when SRE has the power to say, hey, I'm not carrying the pager for that anymore until you improve the service, then they actually have power to say like, dev team, this is on you. You need to start fixing this for either reliability or fewer bugs, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I never had this particular connection before, but like I think good test engineers are kind of like DevOps
They
because they're
are.
not. If someone's banging on a keyboard finding bugs, that's useful, but not that useful. What's useful is enabling the entire team, from engineers to program managers, to understand the quality of the system, either by exposing the bugs or surfacing them or giving them systems that make it easier for them to develop high quality code with less bugs in it. So it's very DevOps like. It's about enablement. And one of the things I was teaching when I was at Microsoft was testing in production.
Hmm.
And testing in production can be interpreted as I don't do any testing. I do all my testing in production. I just wrote, there's the old the beer guy. It says I don't always test
That's
my code
bad.
when I do so. Yeah, exactly.
Those sections.
So we
But
would
you
put
do
that.
have to test some things in production, and I learned so
Yeah.
much about how to almost like do the switch off and on, where you build one stream of infrastructure that's your new infrastructure while keeping your old infrastructure going, and then testing it while you're doing like certain things in production. And
That's
it's
exactly right. That's a great technique, and
I
that's
learned
what we
that
would
from
talk
Dan
about.
because he's
And,
amazing.
and that's what
But
we
I
would talk
learned
about.
so. But the
Yeah.
S devs at Amazon are like a special breed because you've got the QA, right? But they're building so much infrastructure and automating so many things, so that it's like almost like SRE, like QA, but but
Yeah.
SDE, but like it's like a realm of all. Like if you want someone to build you a sustainable infrastructure that can scale, like they are just amazing, you know?
Right. And then the point we would make is you should definitely test pre-production, but
Of course, yeah.
there's no substitute for production. The complexity, the permutations of what's going to happen, there's no substitute for it in production. And actually that comes all the way through, follow that trail all the way through into when I was working with folks on their resilience strategy. We would break resilience into 3 parts. And Justin, I can give you a link to where I describe this for folks with the show notes. But we divide resilience into 3 parts. One is high availability,
Mhm.
disaster recovery, and then continuous resilience. And continuous resilience is about monitoring your system and experimenting on your system, sometimes called chaos engineering, about
I love chaos
introducing
engineering so
faults
much.
in a risk mitigated way to understand how your system's going to operate in production. So that testing in production follows all the way through to that continuous resilience part.
I don't think people realize that at a certain scale, with fancy package managers and like just different ways that help you to engineer at that scale, you there you can do a lot of testing pre-production, but it's nothing like a production,
You,
The
you
you
know?
can't.
complexity of systems, yeah.
Exactly. You have to find a small way, whether it be like in between releases or something, to see like a safe way and obviously a smart way to test in some realm of that's production, and just keeping the infrastructure for your like sandboxes and like different testing environments really like close to your production is so hard.
Yeah,
So it's like,
exactly. Exactly.
There's only one production for a reason, right? Like you can't afford another production, whether if it's just like raw costs of the infrastructure, but the time, the like mental capacity to like try and then just like having customers and routing traffic, all this stuff gets way too complex. You're just like, I just
Beyond
need
your
to
imagination.
yeah, but
you need to
I mean,
simplify.
at that scale, the amount of like just building Linux at that scale, building Java at that scale, building it for all those different architectures, like I don't think people fully realize what that kind of the infrastructure it takes to do that, you know?
Exactly. And if I could dive into those other 2 pieces, I just said we're continuous resilience is what the heck is high availability and disaster recovery? Why are they different? High availability is you might recognize it if you're in AWS as building across availability zones would be a big part of that, right? It's about component level failures, like a individual virtual server dies. How do you survive that? Well, you survive that by having a distributed system and stateless servers, and you're able to replace it with auto scaling. That's high availability, right? And that's what you're operating with in a single region. Or even if talking about shared responsibility model for resilience, which Alex and I created, like so you implementing auto scaling and you implementing a stateless architecture, that's your responsibility. AWS's responsibility is that they will spin up an instance when you told them to. But even at a deeper level, you can like talk about hard drive failures. They happen all the time in AWS data centers, all the time. And if you're using like S3, you don't know it because your data is replicated across multiple hard drives in multiple availability zones. They have the ability to detect a hard drive, take it out of service, and replace it, and your puts and your gets are not even impacted. That's all
Their data
AWS
techs are
responsibility.
amazing.
And the systems are amazing. So, but that's pure AWS responsibility. Then disaster recovery contrasted to high availability. High availability is those frequent, everyday, smallish things that can be fixed on site. Then disaster recovery is about those less frequent, much bigger, impactful issues, natural disasters, regional impact. We can get back to what that means. I did not say regional outage because that has never happened, but a regional impact or regional event where you can't run in that region anymore. And you actually have to change sites. You have to move to a different AWS region, or in the on-prem world, you have to move to a different data center. And that's what disaster recovery is about. And that's what I, as I said, I got really into, and that's what my company currently does.
I just want to say that. I appreciate all the things you wrote at AWS because it made my life as a solutions architect so much better trying to explain the shared responsibility model to customers. And I'm like, no, but this is yours.
Engineers in general that I've met don't understand the impact of written documentation, right? Like just writing things down
at
and
AWS
how wide.
Fire. I learned more from white papers at AWS than I did from college.
Well, the disaster recovery white paper is a banger. Just read it. It's a fun read. 80 pages of tech.
I think.
90 pages of tech. Yeah. No, actually,
but it's actually really good though. Like it's very dense. It took multiple nights to break that down.
Most of the AWS white papers are not theoretical, right? Like
that's what I love about them. There's so many white papers that are theoretical, and you just like. Your eyes glaze over. You're like, this is not real life in production. AWS is like, let me tell you how this is going to break.
I mean, I'm a weirdo, and I love reading the theoretical ones. You're like, give me some educational.
I love real, like that's why I love Casey's talk from Scale, because it took the theoretics of like distributed systems, and then he was like, and then this is what we did in real life. Because like that is what happens in real life. Like I think I used to think being a solutions architect was like not as cool as being an engineer until I did both. And the skills are they're so complementary to each other, and seeing how big systems and architecture like work together, and then getting to learn that like smaller pieces of when you have to actually engineer it. It's amazing to see the two together.
If folks like that kind of like applied theory, they want to check out a new book on resilience. It's an O'Reilly book. I'm not an author, but Jennifer Moran is. She took over the disaster recovery practice from me, so you might we'll include a link to that too, I assume.
Oh, I'm gonna go buy that.
Now, Seth, you were mentioning high availability versus disaster recovery, and what point is there a clear line there of like, hey, this is HA and this is something for a disaster?
It's not always so clear. I mean, one of the distinctions about it is, can I fix this in place versus do I need to fail over to another place? But even that's not totally clear. Like if I back up my data to another place and I have some sort of failure with my data and I'm able to replace it on the spot, that's not really failing over a different place, but it involves some different other place in the process. So that's where it gets a little fuzzy, but most often is really about recovering in another location.
I always think about highly available as like something you do in the present. Like you want it to be highly available right now.
Okay, yeah.
And disaster recovery is like when something really wrong goes like wrong, and then
that's another way to think about it. Exactly, that's another way to think about it. And high availability is measured using nines, right? So that's about that being in the present. While disaster recovery is measured with recovery time objective, how long am I going to be down? Recovery point objective, how much data am I going to lose? All the way down.
Almost at that point, you're like, HA is nines, disaster recovery is dollars. Right? It's just like at some point there where you have this shift of like, hey.
Say that again. I need more potential customers to hear that, because it's funny. Talking to customers about what RPO does. We come across folks that say, I'm in multiple availability zones. That's working fine for me. And that's based on past experience. What do they say about financial instruments? Past experience is no guarantee of future returns.
Security and what do you call it? Reliability. Just like nobody cares about it until something bad happens.
Until something,
like,
exactly.
It
It's
drives
all
me
insurance.
nuts. Like
Everything about it.
every time like I have to talk to like an engineer manager and I'm like, well, what is your what are we doing for like reliability and what are we thinking about for disaster recovery? And they're like, I don't know. It's in the cloud. No, sir. That is not how this works. Abstraction does not mean you get to be lazy.
Shared responsibility model. Just share that. Like I was at one of our architectural resilience days, which I helped create, and somebody at a company said how he got the same pushback, and he just printed out the shared responsibility model from my white paper and put it on his cube, and then pointed at this pre-COVID. So pointed at that every time this subject came up.
I'm gonna get that picture of you in your cloud like suit.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just gonna like put a quote and then put the picture and be like, do you see Seth judging you right now?
Well, these are prospective customers I'm talking to, so I can't be too judgy. I'll put them off.
But I can.
True. But like, I want to say to them, like, I think Justin, what you say about insurance has some validity, but it also breaks down a little because like insurance is about like, oh, something bad might happen. If that happens, I don't want to be wiped out. So that's valid. But the part where it breaks down is I've been thinking about this. It's more like gambling than insurance, right? If you don't have disaster recovery, you are literally like saying it's going to work. Just, spin of the roulette wheel. I'm going to spin the roulette wheel every day and hope that green zero doesn't come up. And because green zero hasn't come up in the last 30 days, I'm going to assume it's never going to come up in the next infinity days. And I'm good. That's
but think about
the
all
problem.
the tools that are changing, the way that we have AI, the way that people have much more access to compute power. You know what I mean? Like, and just so many different levels of the way the industry is changing and what's available. Like, we have no idea the way that we are going to start experiencing downtime and the different attacks that people are going to have to go through. And just the fact that we're using such compute intensive like workloads, like all of these things are going to change how workloads and like different disaster recovery is affected in the future, and just pretending like it's not going to happen to you. You should just plan for it to happen.
Yeah, you can't pretend it's not going to happen to you. Yeah.
I mean, the thing about gambling too is a lot of people think it's, optional. In this case, you're like, no, this isn't, you're running infrastructure. This is not an optional thing.
You're gambling whether you want to or not.
Yeah. Like they think that it's like something, and I'm like, oh, well, you can have a little bit of downtime. You don't know how long you're going to be down because it's something you probably haven't experienced yet.
You assume that you know what the situation will be, right? It's like, I secure my house by locking my doors, right? Is it complete security? No, like I know how to pick a lock.
Yeah.
But it is going to like help me to some degree of like, hey, this is like the basics that everyone
defense and layers.
Yeah, I'm gonna lock this door, and like if I'm in the car, right, like I'm gonna be a little more secure by like putting on my seatbelt. Yeah. Right? Like it's just like a common sense thing now where a lot of people there was, a lot of people didn't wear seatbelts because like it's restrictive. I don't want to do that. And like I'm gambling all the time I'm driving. I don't know if it's going to be my fault, if it's going to be someone else's fault. There's just stuff happening all over the place. And it's like, well, is that seatbelt actually going to protect me? Most of the time, it's proven that yes, that is going to. Sometimes it's not. And you have to put those systems in place that say like, hey, we want you to be protected in this environment. Please put on your seatbelt in your infrastructure.
All cloud providers have. Okay, I want to talk about regional issues. All right, I said I'm not gonna say regional outage. A regional outage is a region is hard down. It's not responding. It's not there. A comet has wiped it out, or it's been transported off the Earth using alien technology. That has never happened in the history of any major cloud provider. What instead happens?
Google.
Like complete hard down.
The fire region. Yeah.
Well, that took out like part of the, I don't know.
It took out 2 AZs that was actually the same data center.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. And Google does that, right? So
I mean, East One went down pretty hard, but it wasn't.
Well, parts of East One.
It wasn't hard. That's the point. It wasn't hard down. What happened was you'll see is that either a particular service will be impacted, either a service will be down or mostly down. And if that's in AWS, that service might be dependent on by other services. So when Kinesis had an event, CloudWatch had an event, and
not just that, but if you take down S3 or just certain of the base
S3 and Route
services,
53.
you don't know how much like of the internet East One powers until it goes down, and you're like, oh wow.
Well, but we could fix that. RPO can help you fix that, right? So RPO exists so that if there's a regional issue, either with a service or sometimes networking, there was, I think, the year after Kinesis, a networking issue that happened in East One, and that was causing
networking is so important and
complex.
it's so hard. Yes, it's so like.
Now, what are you doing to help prevent those things? Like when I think of disaster recovery, I think I have a site over here, I have a site over there, I have a cold, like a 10-minute cutover. We take snapshots and we restore them over there, and it's just like a hot standby or some sort of failover. Like Kinesis goes down. What are you doing differently in 2025 that isn't just a run the same thing over there?
Well, the RPO technology that I saw in 2022 at reInvent blew me away, and it took me a few years, to leave AWS and join them. But like I've been thinking about it ever since, and I was actually trying to convince folks at AWS to build this technology I believed in, which is it's the only product that is not just a backup of your data, but it's a backup and restore of your data, your infrastructure, your networking, and your security principles, and will stand up a completely functional workload stack in another region, in another AWS account. So not only cross region, but cross account. And in order to be able to do that, we need to actually not only have your data, but also understand what your infrastructure is, and we'll store that metadata for that. And not only copy and paste, like if I copied an IAM policy from your source to your recovery environment, that policy is probably useless as it references resources that only exist in source. So what RPO actually does is translates. It actually does smart translation. So that, when I copy this policy over here, that DynamoDB database that I protected over here is now, well, actually, that's a bad example because it has the same name, but this RDS instance now has this endpoint or whatever. I'm going to copy that over and change that ARN so that it actually works. It actually does.
Are you an AWS partner?
Yeah, of course. We're an AWS partner. We're actually a better together story with AWS because I've been talking about, and this is a whole separate thing, I don't know if we can get into, about building blocks, right? And how you take the fundamental building blocks of things and you build the next layer above it. So the fundamental building blocks of AWS are its services and resources, but the next layer above that are things like Elastic Disaster Recovery or AWS Backup, which take those fundamental blocks and put them together in ways to make them more powerful, and you can do them together. And RPO then sits at the next layer above that. As you go up in layers, you're reducing complexity by abstracting it away. So RPO is orchestrating Elastic Disaster Recovery, AWS Backup, RDS Snapshot. It's using Bodo 3 to understand your infrastructure and stand it back up. It knows IAM, and it's orchestrating all of those things to stand up a working, functioning workload in another region, in another account.
And this only makes sense in the AWS context, right? Because like you have to be all in AWS. Like if I have something here on my counter that's a computer running a process, like I can't I have it connects to AWS, it does stuff with AWS, but it's outside of that API and system, so I can't do anything with that, right?
I mean, yes, we're all in on AWS right now, and we're generally targeting folks who have AWS workloads. If you had something on, like there is one thing, there's one service we support that's a partner service that's like a replacement for auto scaling, and I'm blanking on the name, but it's so like we will support other AWS centric things also, but something on your counter. Yeah. We're not supporting
because a lot of people that I talk to now, and while it's at AWS, like they have stuff everywhere, and it's like, we can restore the AWS stuff. Even like when I was at Disney Plus, it's like, there was a good portion of it AWS, but there was a lot of it still on-prem, and there was just like a lot of pieces that were like, hey, these all interact with each other.
Yeah,
and we can't necessarily just like reroute all of our POPs or our data centers to the new region wherever it lives.
Yeah, well, without making any promises, I mean, a company like ours, which is a small startup, still, early stage startup, would eventually want to look at how we could protect other clouds, right? We're focused on AWS now. That's where our expertise is, and we're developing that expertise and just getting the right functionality there. But ultimately, in a this is just talking abstractly, in a ideal future, we'd be able to support you on any cloud.
And that,
what do you do?
I guess that leads me to like my second question here of one way of doing this, like where you're translating region locked services and region aware services for like, that's RDS isn't the same in East 2 versus West 2, right?
Yeah.
And you have to translate those things. But there's a new wave of cloud providers that I find that are just like, everything's global. Right, like Cloudflare and there's a bunch of they all have like, even GCP, like there's just like everything's global. If it's just a global thing, you don't have to rewrite it and re-reference it, and you can deploy this anywhere. And like when I deploy Cloudflare workers, they run everywhere.
Yeah,
right? They're not here. This Lambda function is in this region in this AZ, whatever. Like this.
I wonder
VPC.
how that works in real life though. Like being global, like is it just you're writing it globally and then they make sure it's multi?
They write it globally. Yeah. It's just like, it's a global resource.
Yeah, we found, even in AWS, there's some things like Aurora Global Database, DynamoDB, Global Tables
Yeah.
that you can consider similar to that. It does introduce operational complexity of how you manage data consistency across all
That's what
those
I was
regions.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean, so and I think that at last reInvent they did introduce some more consistent
Hmm.
data storage, but yeah, so you have to worry about like, all right, I'm writing to here, but I might be reading from here and not getting the same thing.
That's
So
what
it
I'm saying.
does.
Like, how do you, like, yeah, they're taking the complexity for you, but what if you want to make sure that you're in certain regions? You know what I mean? Like, you're assuming that they're going to do it for you, but you don't have the knowledge to know that you're.
And
I mean,
most
well, like you
workloads
can
don't
test those
need to be
things, right? Yeah.
multi-region though,
Yeah.
What'd
right?
you say?
Most workloads don't need to be multi-region. Yeah.
Oh,
That's
we said
For
the
sure.
same thing at the
I,
same time.
that's, I was repeating what you were saying.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that the global aspect is like you can test that it's available everywhere. Like I could run
yeah.
connections and just say like, oh, is it there? Yeah.
yeah.
And it makes my latency lower. But even like for like the Disney Plus example, we were in 4 regions when I was there. And it was like 2 in the US, 2 in the EU. And right when I was leaving, they were expanding to, I think, 4 more. It was just like, oh, we have more customers. We're expanding to more regions.
Yeah.
We're
Because
just copying
sometimes when
this
you
everywhere.
have like a workload, right, and you know that more of your customers are in, I don't know, Ireland, and then you know a lot of your other customers in the US are in New York, you're going to want those regions to be closer, you know. So,
Yes, maybe. That's one of the reasons we talk about multi-region, and there's literally video of me saying that's a good reason to go multi-region. But
yeah,
also, you don't have to do that. You can use like a global accelerator, which
yeah.
is gives you an endpoint that's near your customers, then puts you on the AWS backbone, which is
hmm
still speed of light consideration, but it's going to be faster than the public internet to get to New York from Ireland.
Because that's what I'm
Uh,
saying. Just like, how
yeah.
do you know if you might want to, I like almost know where your regions are? Be just,
You want to go multi-region if you're big, if you're a big company with lots of cloud engineers that can support being multi-region. I think that that and you have that need. I think, what RPO would love to have those big companies as customers, but we tend to target a lot more mid-sized companies that have very important workloads in healthcare and finance, but they don't have this massive cloud team to maintain a multi-region active architecture, right? They're
Yeah.
running out of US East 1 or US West 2, in which case RPO is going to step in and make it super easy for them to stand themselves up in another region should US East 1 or US West 2 be having problems so they can continue serving their customers.
also
And
they have to worry about audits with financial and healthcare stuff. So
Offsite
they,
backups,
yeah.
compliance. The thing I want to mention before I forget is ransomware. So, like I talked about the type of things that could happen in disaster recovery. Ransomware is like disaster recovery is here. Ransomware is another layer above that. Talking about
And nobody ever
defense and
thinks
layers.
about that in recovery. There was
But,
4 different hospitals,
yeah,
healthcare systems hit last week.
it's probably the most frequent type of disaster, if you want to put it in the disaster recovery category, that you're going to that's happening today. And RPO, seeing that, we implemented the ability to recover from ransomware attacks. One way we did that is by enabling cross account, right? So your recovery account has separate credentials than your operating account so that the bad people, the bad guys that are in there can't get into this. It's a safe bunkered account. The other thing we've done is we obviously have different recovery points that we take, so you could roll back the clock before your data was corrupted. And the other thing we've done is when you bring your service back up, you could optionally put all your compute in isolation. So if there's malware on there that's causing the data corruption, you could actually isolate it so it doesn't affect anything, and then you could run forensics against it. And we give the ability to do push button forensics, and you can immediately, replace or take out anything that's contaminated, anything that's clean. You can immediately release, and you're back up and running in this new safe bunkered account. And you're back up and operating in a day or two, maybe less, instead of the average ransomware recoveries. Guess how long? What the average ransomware recovery time is?
months at least.
Yeah, well, 21 days, but yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
That's
yeah.
actually really good because I saw a major provider. We're not going to say name names, but they were trying to sell a defense suite, and it didn't do half of those things. But I think it's like that's so important. Like there are very simple but genius ways that you meld things together to fight ransomware, like how you're talking about database backups. If you can pull a backup, you can be like, hey, you may have ruined this, like what do you call it, backup, but I have another one, like,
Yeah,
and then you're not
exactly.
waiting to get it unlocked. And that's really interesting too, the way that you said block your compute power, because some bad actors are taking over other people's compute to
Yeah,
DOS attack.
yeah,
So it's like,
exactly.
you know what I mean? Like that's what I'm saying. Like we have to have like a new level of flexibility in building architecture because the world is changing so fast. And not having that flexibility is just crippling yourself later and creating like technical debt. Like the world is changing. The way that AI and all these different like the fact that we have access to all this compute with like different cloud providers, and the way that people are taking over the compute. Like before they were doing it to mine crypto, now they're using different weird compute power to DOS attack people. Like we have to get more creative, and it has to be more of thinking in the future, because you're going to just continue to get hit in new and creative ways.
Right. And do you want to like, put 6 engineers for 6 months building something, or do you just want to like go to someone like RPO and just pay some money to have us handle it for you? Now, some big companies, Disney probably wants to put 6 engineers for 6 months on it and just build it. But a lot of other companies would rather have their engineers working on functionality and features and let us do the hard work.
That sounds like that's the exact AWS sales pitch, right? It's
Yeah,
just like
I was gonna say that is the
you were
that
there
is
for
the
quite a
Well,
while.
that is the cloud pitch in general.
except AWS gives you a lot of functionality, a lot of power, but I like to say they give you the Lego bricks, right? They're giving you all this functionality and power, but you got to put it together in the right way. And what I like to say is RPO and other platforms are giving you the pirate ship. We're putting it together for you, so you don't actually have to have someone put together the Lego bricks for you.
I
How
mean,
does
if you
that work
pay enough,
for
they'll put the Lego bricks together for you. But
how does that work for things that aren't AWS native, right? Like I have servers that I have workloads on. Like you don't know about, like you can snapshot the disk maybe, but if I have a Kubernetes cluster and I'm like, hey, my EKS cluster runs 1,000 different microservices, like you're not
Yeah.
snapshotting those and restoring them somewhere.
We're all in on EKS. So, I mean, we saw that EKS was rising amongst our customers in popularity. And so, exactly right. So, we treat Kubernetes resources just like we treat AWS resources. So, we will see the EKS cluster, we will see all the manifests in it, and stand everything back up in your recovery region with everything you had in the primary region in terms of your service accounts, in terms of your ingresses, whatever Kubernetes resource you can name, your deployments, we'll stand it up for you in the recovery side. And it's a first-class citizen. We actually recently released our V2 version of EKS, where now we expose all those Kubernetes resources to you. Before we were doing that for you, but it was all kind of hidden, opaque. Now it's actually exposed. You can actually see, oh, I want specifically this namespace protected, but not this namespace. Now you can do that.
Hmm. And what a lot of people don't understand is that like EKS is a proprietary service on the back end, right? Like the authentication, the IAM they do now with, it's not Ursa anymore. I forget what it's called now.
Oh.
But it's like, these are all in like a backend. You have no access to restore those pieces on how your workloads are interacting with the rest of AWS. That's like a thing that has to be snapshotted together and then moved. It's not a
Yeah.
generic Kubernetes. There are
No,
Kubernetes backup
like
services.
we'll take your like I mean, for instance, we'll see your deployments and we'll reprovision them on the recovery side, and then we'll let Kubernetes take care of spinning up an autoscaling group and spinning up the nodes or the Fargate tasks or whatever it's doing, like based on that deployment and based on the deployment set and all those things. So we're taking care of the level. We're making sure the configuration gets over there so that Kubernetes does the right thing.
Does
isn't
that
it
interfere
wild?
with does that interfere with like other people's like CI/CD pipelines or GitOps flows or something? Where like, hey, this thing is supposed to restore from a Git repo all of my manifests.
Um, so no, because we're just taking the source of truth, which is your source environment. We're not taking them from your Git repo. So that we've made that as an engineering decision, right? We're not things we do pull down for repos are obviously the container images, right? Those get pulled down from repos because that's the way that works. But in terms of the manifest, no, it's going to just look like the manifest translated to work in the new
Mm-hmm.
region and the new account.
But even then, like load balancers are different. volumes are different. I mean, you have to take a lot of stuff, right? Like
Yeah, but no, again, like so, like volume, yeah, like volume will come up. You have your PVC and your PV defined. We'll bring it over. We'll do any translations necessary and let Kubernetes do the work to bring it up. A load balancer, same thing. You'll have your service and ingress defined. We'll translate it, bring it over, and it brings up the load balancer. Believe me, it works because this is where I spend most of my time is on EKS, creating EKS workloads and playing with them and testing them. Like the engineering team jokes that I'm their QA because A, that's my background. B, it was my background because I'm good at breaking things, and whenever I find bugs, I'm always filing them. I went ahead and I talked to you about this, Justin. I created some EKS repos in GitHub just for fun. I created one, once they announced that auto mode at reInvent, I was like, what is this auto mode thing? Okay, this looks interesting. Is anybody creating like a good educational GitHub repo to teach what auto mode is? No, I didn't see that out there. So I went and created one, and we can include the link to it in the show notes. But it's a single Terraform repo that will stand up a EKS cluster with auto mode, with attached storage, with a volume, with a load balancer, and a sample app, just so you can see how it works.
Cool.
Isn't it amazing how Kubernetes or different flavors of Kubernetes just runs the entire world out?
Again, just seeing the rise in popularity of it is pretty amazing. And we do actually have quite a few customers that are using ECS also. And I think they each have their pros and cons. I mean, Kubernetes has complexity. I don't think anybody denies that, right? And so if you don't want to deal with complexity and you're willing to give up the community, I guess the great thing about Kubernetes is the community and the third-party products and everything, ecosystem. Yeah. If you're willing to give that up to get much less complexity, than ECS is your go-to. So that's also
I mean, it's the same thing with like AWS, right? Like people go to AWS for the ecosystem, right? It's like there's so many partners, there's so many other things that work with AWS. Even just the amount of documentation and being able to find your problem exists way more on AWS than the other clouds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the ecosystem is super powerful. I mean, especially as AWS has grown and become over 200 services, and you could put them together in an infinite number of ways. You're always going to come across these interesting edge cases, and sometimes you might even find someone else that hit that first and actually solved it
and wrote it down.
Wrote it down.
That's why I'm just wondering, like, where, like, with kind of all the different like layoffs and cuts around the industry, that people are getting rid of like community managers and community people and kind of like dev advocates and just kind of like solutions architects and stuff. And I'm just like, dude, the entire ecosystems and communities are one of the biggest reasons people want to use it, because we know if we go on Stack Overflow, you're going to find answers for these projects because everybody's using it. Like that's almost like the backbone of why people pick certain technologies, because of the way that you can learn to use it on the internet and troubleshoot it.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent on these large companies to respect what each of these roles does, what a solution architect does, what a developer advocate does, what community is, and leverage that. It's to basically, I mean, if Amazon is going to live by its leadership principles, and customer obsessed is pretty much, I think, the top one.
Did you see Justin's face when Seth said that?
Are they going to? I said if they're going to live by their principles, then they have to respect these roles and build them. And I don't really have a comment on whether they're doing that these days. I'm not.
It's not even just AWS though. Like we can't even pretend like that's an AWS problem. Like so many people have undervalued solutions architects and dev advocates and stuff, and it's just like, and for like when I first started as a solutions architect, it used to make me feel like really bad that like we were supposedly not as technical, and now some of the most technical people I know are solutions architects. Like they have the big picture. That is so much, like there's so much more to it, and it's amazing. Like I hope we get to a place as an industry where we go back to valuing all those different roles individually, because they all do play a part into allowing people to effectively use your product,
Yeah, absolutely.
You mean you don't like Amazon Q? Is that not solving all your problems? This is like because that like a lot of it has been replaced with that, right? It's just like, hey, we have enough content, information, and experience written down that we can just repeat that over and over again. And granted,
wild. They think that they think that they are going to get solutions architects to replace themselves with creating content and Amazon Q, and that's not how it's going to go.
There is a thing to be said there where the amount of 101 Kubernetes talks and blog posts and things that I've done over the last decade, it just keeps repeating, because there's always new people, and it's not a bad thing, but trying to find is the 101 talk from 5 years ago still the same as
there's a lot of 100 level of everything and like 400 level of everything, but the middle to me is always the part that is like,
how do you get there?
Yeah.
Right? And
like,
there's a big gap there, but like the bottom tier of like, hey, we know how some of this stuff works, and if we just rewrite it with the new context, like that, it doesn't take someone a lot of experience to be able to do. But then people don't like doing the 200 to 300 because it doesn't make any money. Right? Like people pay the money for the 400 level contents, and you get the customers at the 100 level.
But how do you get people to go from 1 to 4? And remember, like, it's the buy-in of,
you give them some disasters.
Look, MongoDB, say what you will, but their documentation and the way that they've done Mongo universities is like, besides between that and the fact that you can just, the way that you can dump things in and you can kind of like use MongoDB, that is one of the main reasons that they are so popular with people that don't have a DBA and they're starting an app and they're, you know what I mean? Because of the amount of education they've invested in. There are big companies out there completely biting MongoDB University because of how much effort they've put into it. And that enables developers who have no experience to just be like, I'm going to go pick this up and use it. And then they get stuck using it.
Well, I've rarely learned anything from just reading a document. I have to do and that's why I built these Terraform repos to build Kubernetes, because that's how I learned how to do it.
Yeah.
So I think, that maybe that 200, 300 needs to be those kinds of workshops or tutorials.
So.
And honestly, again, I said I created these Kubernetes Terraform as educational tools because I saw a need for it, and I knew I would learn by doing it, but I could also give back to the community so they could learn from it. And I think that's important. That's where you need developer advocate work is what that is. I did that as a side project. It has nothing to do really with RPO, but I did it as a side project, and that's what developer advocates do. They create these kind of resources.
They would do that with 100, like a 100, 200 like gap kind of thing. Like I think that people lose just because 100 level stuff is out there. There's so much setup and trying to get familiar if you've never touched something before.
Yeah.
And I think doing 100 level things as a community, even if it's like virtual or workshops or giving that same talk, it's the same to you. But how often do you meet people in technology who they think something is simple because they've been using it for so long, and then the new people have no idea what's going on?
Back when I was reliability lead for Well Architected, I inherited the Well Architected workshops, which kind of exist but don't really exist in the form they did before. Back when they exist as their own site, I created lots of 100 level workshops. I created a workshop on here's how to deploy something resilient using CloudFormation. Right, and that's a pretty 100 level, and then I basically walked them through deploying a service and taught them at this point is where we're setting up the multi-availability zone, and here's where we're setting up this aspect of it. And I believe in 100 level hands-on content. Absolutely.
Do you ever think that disaster recovery will go away or just will be replaced with HA, right? Like, is there a moment where HA is?
I'm not sure.
They're very separate things.
So, I don't know if I finished my statement before, which was all cloud providers have outages. Amazon AWS says they have data and shows the data that they have less outages than the other providers, but less is not zero, right? And until a cloud provider can offer you zero regional impacting events, there's going to be a need for disaster recovery in the cloud, and I don't see how they would get there.
But even if your cloud provider is constantly up, it doesn't mean that you're not getting ransom attacked.
And then ransomware, which I keep, which is the most common threat. Yeah, exactly.
Like, I don't, in what world would that work? Because they're two different things, and they very much, I think, if you look at it, what is it, $150 billion is going to be lost, they assume in 2025 based off cyber attacks. It's getting worse, not better.
Yeah.
So I think the more and more we need to start looking at security and disaster recovery as almost a thing that you need both to work together and plan for, because it is getting worse, not better. Think about the new creative ways they had remember when the AI, they used AI to pretend to be those executives in Hong Kong and they stole 35 million.
Oh, wow.
Yes, come on, it is going to get there's going to be new creative ways. They got $35 million. You know what I mean?
So thank you, Autumn, because you're scaring people, which is, if
But
you
it's not even
no,
fake
thank you, because
fear.
if you're scared and you don't want to be scared anymore, you want to get rid of that fear, reach out to me, reach out to RPO, and we'll get you all set up. We'll take away all those
And be
fears.
nice to your security team. Listen to them. They're trying to
Yeah.
help you.
Yeah.
What makes disaster recovery better in the future? Like what are the things that people should like up front? I should do this to make disaster recovery just easier on myself.
Well, I mean, back when I was AWS, I started out with and I wrote this line into the reliability pillar, you probably don't need multi-region, right? But then I backed off that line. I don't think I ever got back into the white paper. I backed off that and said, well, you could just back up your data to another region. Like, I mean, that's easy to do. It's going to cost some more money, but it's really easy to do with AWS backup. And at least you'll have some assurance that if the worst came to worst, your data is there and you could, even though it might take you a day or two, restand up everything and get it back working, right? So, and what RPO does is kind of like take that concept and give you the more functionality, like we could stand you up in minutes instead of days with the same level of effort as that, you might as well just back up your data. So I think, what makes disaster recovery easier and better is getting more and more to that point. Like, how can I actually get to a recovery point that meets my business needs with very little effort?
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about, like, I guess I'm trying to think of how to ask this question. Do you marry educating your customers and providing them a service, or is it just more providing them a service?
I tell every one of them my background, that I was the reliability lead, global reliability lead for Well Architected. I wrote the disaster recovery paper. I wrote the disaster recovery blogs. I tell them that, and I say, I'm happy to talk to you about disaster recovery, even has nothing to do with RPO. Call on me, let me know how I can help. I don't usually get taken up on that outside of the context of RPO, but we have a lot of good discussions within the context of RPO.
Seth, where should people find you online?
Oh, well, I have a link tree, and it's like whatever link tree's URL is /Seth Eliot, 1L, 1T in Eliot. And that links to everything, or you can just search for me on LinkedIn and that links back to the link tree. So I think those are two good places.
LinkedIn. Are you on Blue Sky?
I'm on Blue Sky. I don't spend a ton of time there. I don't spend a ton of time on any of the socials, except maybe LinkedIn, if you count that as a social. But I am there, and I do post some content there. Yeah.
Perfect. We'll add you to we have a starter pack for guests on the show. So we'll have you there if people want to find you. And thank you so much for coming on and talking all about disaster recovery.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
It was so nice meeting you, even if it is
same
virtual.
here. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we will talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fork Around and Find Out. If you like this show, please consider sharing it with a friend, a coworker, a family member, or even an enemy. However we get the word out about this show helps it to become sustainable for the long term. If you want to sponsor this show, please go to fafo.fm/sponsor and reach out to us there about what you're interested in sponsoring and how we can help. We hope your systems stay available and your pagers stay quiet. We'll see you again next time.